A very good afternoon. These are the top business stories live from the Sky Newsroom. US inflation holds its ground, paving the way for a potential interest rate cut next month. Also ahead, rising rents. Find out why being a tenant has become much more expensive. Plus, we'll cross live to the O2 Arena in London, which is celebrating yet another blockbuster year. A very good afternoon on this Wednesday, Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey. We're going to begin in the United States, where the rate of inflation has increased in line with expectation this month, according to the latest data released just in the last couple of hours. The annual rate of inflation stands at 2.7%, above the Fed's target goal of 2%, but not exceeding expectations by economists who've been polled on this matter. It's led many to believe that rates will be cut now on the 18th of December. Well, let's speak to Stephen Juneau. He is from the Bank of America's Global Research Unit, is a US economist. Stephen, very good afternoon to you. So no surprises then, essentially?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on. And definitely no real surprises from this. You had an inline report. The details were a little bit mixed. You had firmer goods prices than we expected. But on the flip side, you had soft services prices. I think a good thing that we saw in the report, or a positive development, was really that moderation in rent that we've all been looking for as U.S. economists. We're seeing that moderate. That's an important ingredient to really get inflation back to 2%.
In saying that, it is above the ultimate target goal of 2%. It is higher than the 2.6% we saw in October. Effectively, what I'm trying to say here is it is going in the wrong direction, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen inflation progress stall. And I think this gets back to the fact that that last mile, at least in the US economy, where you've seen such resilient growth, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard for the Fed to get it down to 2%. But it doesn't mean that the direction of travel in terms of disinflation has really cooled. And then more importantly, the risk to the upside from an economic fundamental perspective. We have a cooler labor market. Wage inflation is moderating. The quits rate is down. That should all point towards further progress towards disinflation and towards the target. And of course, we have well-anchored inflation expectations which have this gravitational effect on overall inflation. So there's still these good fundamentals that point towards further disinflation. Of course, there are risks out there as well, and that comes from the policy landscape.
So let's look at where we're going to go with interest rates, if you like. I see this afternoon it's now 96, 97, 98% probability that there is going to be a rate cut next week.
Yeah, we're of the same views. So for us, what this report did was it really cemented the fact that the Fed's going to cut rates at its next meeting. So they're going to follow through with another 25 basis points of cuts. That will be 100 basis points in total since the start of their cutting cycle. But where it gets a lot more uncertain, of course, is as we turn to next year. That stalling in inflation that you mentioned earlier, the expectations for potential inflationary policies to be enacted, well, that all adds risk to the fact that the Fed could be done sooner, could not cut much next year. We're only looking for 2 25 basis point cuts next year, and for the Fed to be done in June. So they may not have much further to go on this, but we do think they're going to go through with it in December.
And there's obviously, of course, the added uncertainty of a new incoming US president, a familiar one, but, into his second term. And there is concern that some of his policies could be inflationary in themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, in our forecast, we're expecting tariffs to be implemented. We're expecting kind of a trade war to happen. We're expecting expansionary fiscal policy. All of these policies will be inflationary on the margin, at least in 2025. We're looking for inflation to largely get stuck over the course of next year at where it is today. So for core PCE, that's at 2.8%, so above the Fed's target. So that's going to give them little reason to really cut aggressively. They're going to look to slow the pace of their cutting cycle. And that policy implementation, whatever comes into effect, well, that's really going to shape how far the Fed's able to go, along with, of course, the evolution of the economic data.
Okay, Stephen, great analysis as always. Thank you for your time this afternoon. That's Stephen Juneau from the Bank of America. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now let's bring you up to date with some of the rest of today's news. And tractors have returned to Westminster in another heated protest by farmers across the country today. Many are angry over changes in Rachel Reeves's budget, which see inherited agricultural assets worth more than £1 million taxed at 20%. They're currently exempt from inheritance tax. This was the scene, as you can see, outside Parliament a little earlier on today. Quite a boisterous protest.
My message to government is, I'm happy to pay tax, to contribute to society like everybody else, but I can't do that now with both arms tied behind my back. You have a choice, Mr. Starmer. Destroy your own country's food security for what? So you can give 20% of our farms away to foreign farmers. It just doesn't make any sense. Lastly, if we were miners, steel workers or teachers, our unions would be stood here next to us today. Where are you, NFU? This is really bad. This fight should be led from the top, not from the bottom. But fight we will, Mr. Starmer. We will not sit back and let you destroy what we've worked for. The people of this country care where their food comes from, and they care who grows it. Why the hell don't you, Mr. Starmer?
Some pretty angry farmers a little earlier on in central London. Well, let's talk about some other people who are pretty angry this afternoon, particularly those who are renting, because new research from Zoopla shows that it's now far more expensive being a tenant than it has been in the last couple of years. Renting a newly let property will cost you around £270 per month more than it would have done at the end of the pandemic. But is the market cooling off? Let's bring in Richard Donald. He's Executive Director of Research at Zoopla. Richard, just talk us through some of the figures involved in this. You know, I'm sure a lot of people renting know only too well how much prices have gone up in the last couple of years.
Yeah, so we had a huge explosion in demand as we sort of came to the end of the pandemic. The economy reopened, global travel reopened. There were changes to visa rules, very high migration. And we just didn't see any increase in the supply of homes for rent. Landlords stopped investing effectively off the back of tax changes in 2016. And so big supply-demand imbalance, rents up 27% over the last 3 years, ahead of earnings at 19%. But I think a mixture of weaker demand side pressures, a little bit of growth coming through now on the supply side, 12% more homes for rent than this time last year. We've now got rental inflation running at its lowest level for 3 years at just under 4% and as low as sort of 1.5% just under in London.
That's interesting. I want to talk about some of the macro stuff, in a second, Richard. Just on that point, that if your rents or if the market's cooling and there's more supply, we all know landlords can turn around to tenants and ask for more money. Is it ever worth getting in touch with your landlord and saying, well, actually, can you knock a bit off, please?
Definitely think there's, I'd encourage all renters to either speak to their agent or their landlord. And look, a lot of renters, it takes time for these rent rises at the kind of leading edge of the market to feed back down through the market, because a lot of people might not have seen some of this rental growth coming through. And so if you're worried about how much your rent might reset, do chat to your agent or your landlord. And again, for people in tenancy, they might not see the level of increases that we're reporting today.
And Richard, what are landlords saying about this? Because, many of them have complained over recent years about changes to the law, feeling that actually they're kind of being portrayed as the bad guys and all of this, that new regulation has made it less appealing, and thus they've pulled out of the market. Has that then shifted if you're seeing this cooling as you've suggested?
I think what's really happened with private landlords is they were hit with tax changes in 2016. We've had, general increase in regulation. We've got the Renters' Rights Bill coming through for England. We've already had changes in Wales and Scotland. And the big hit really for landlords has come over the last couple of years with higher mortgage rates. And it's really just squeezed the kind of profitability of being a landlord, particularly for those with mortgages and particularly larger mortgages. So overall, the size of the private rented sector has been broadly flat for the last 8 years as landlords exiting the market are being offset by landlords still coming in. And what we're really seeing is there's still growth, and it's growth from the landlords with larger portfolios, seeing it as a cash flow business, and was running it as a business, because historically, a lot of landlords have turned into landlords by accident. Something like 40% of landlords bought their first rented property to live in and have ended up renting it out. So I think we're coming to the end of that now. But I still think yields would need to rise, borrowing costs need to come down before we start to see a sort of a return to net new investment by landlords.
OK, Richard, just very finally, is this an even picture? I assume it's not across the UK. Where are things better or worse?
So it's London, the big cities are really at the sort of forefront of the slowdown in rental inflation, really as affordability pressures are sort of compounding the changes in supply and demand. And look, rents are still rising quite quickly by up to nearly 8-9%. In markets that are adjacent to big cities where rents simply haven't gone up that much and there's headroom for them to rise. So the likes of Blackburn, Burnley, as well as there's a big catch-up happening in Northern Ireland. So like in areas where renting is still affordable relative to incomes, there's still upside for rents over the course of next year. OK, really appreciate your time this afternoon. That is Richard Donald from Zoopla. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. OK, next this afternoon, let's talk about the O2 Arena, or the Millennium Dome, I think, as I still call it. It's been another record-breaking year for the UK's second largest venue, which sold 2.6 million tickets this year, up 3.5% from 2023. So, what is driving everyone to the O2? What are the best shows in town? Let's speak to Steve Sayer. He's general manager of the O2 and is live for us there this afternoon. What is it, Steve? Another good year for you guys. What's been driving the growth?
Yeah, incredible year for us. We've had a fantastic year building on a record year last year, another record year this year. I think we've had all of those incredible headliners like Olivia Rodrigo and Liam Gallagher and The Killers doing a fantastic run in the summer. All of that has helped. But I think what we've also seen is a real sort of diversity of content. You know, we've had J-pop, we've had K-pop, we've had country music, we've had Latin music, and we've had South Asian artists. So I think it's that sort of globalization of music and a real diversification of content that's driven those fantastic numbers.
And is that the point, that for any successful venue these days, they need to have a range, if you like, that they cannot simply just be, you know, a pop music concert, for example, that you need that range?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, you know, rock and pop music is absolutely core to what we do here, and it's probably 60 to 70% of the programming. But yeah, I think you've got to be, you know, you've got to be sort of fleet of foot. You've got to be thinking on your feet. You know, it's a competitive marketplace. You know, and as all venues, we're experiencing sort of cost pressures, and they have been prevalent for a number of years now. So, of course, we've got to think differently. And I think, you know, it's also just a function of where the live music market's at. You know, the live music sector at arena scale is booming. You know, artists are coming through all the time. We've had over 40 first-time headliners this year. Not all of those are new artists. Some of those are, you know, a legend artist or established artists who played the venue for the first time. But yeah, it's definitely that sort of diversity of content that's sort of making a big difference around the margins.
Yeah, indeed, and taking advantage of the fact it is an iconic venue, I just noted that you can clearly go and walk up the O2 Arena if you want to, as well as going to see things inside it. All I would say is, you know, you have had quite a good year this year and indeed last, but during a cost of living crisis in which people have had less money, how have you felt, or are you aware of or conscious of, you know, some of the dynamic pricing that we've seen from certain acts over the last couple of years that, you know, has driven up the price of tickets for venues like the O2 and meant that many people feel that they simply can't afford to go to see their favourite stars?
I mean, we're definitely aware of what's happening in the marketplace. I think it's important to understand it's the artists that really set those ticket prices. You know, but we work very closely with the promoters, our clients, with the agents, you know, and the artists to try and ensure that ticket prices are affordable. And I think the focus here has been really ensuring that we deliver the best possible value for money. And I think, yes, ticket prices, you know, can be getting more expensive, but the productions that the fans are seeing, we had Sam Fender here last night, which was a very sensitively priced event, but the production values were incredible. So, you know, I would say coming to the O2 is a big deal. It's a big occasion. And yes, ticket prices on occasions can be perceived to be a little bit expensive, but I think the fan is getting value for money.
Yeah, I mean, it is. And, you know, for a lot of people, it is an event. Of course it is. But you know, I think they struggle, don't they? But as you say, that's largely down to the people appearing on stage. Just something to pick up, Steve, that you talked about or you touched on earlier, which is the wider economy that we find ourselves in. We know there's going to be significant tax changes coming in. You guys employ people, the minimum wage is going to increase. Are you aware, and how are you going to deal with those extra costs going into next year and beyond?
Well, look, we are very acutely aware of those additional costs that are, whether that's from business rates or from changes to national insurance, and we're planning for that and we're budgeting for that. But, you know, we're in a growth phase. You know, the O2 is the most successful venue in the world with, 2.6 million tickets. I'm sure we'll be number one once again this year when Billboard posts those figures. You know, we're investing to grow. So, of course, we're mindful of those cost pressures, but, you know, we want to invest in our people. We want to invest in the product here, and that's what we're doing. And we want to really drive the business forwards. And I guess it comes down to how we manage the business, how we can be creative, how we can find that new content, how we can find new partners, how we can grow our revenues to ensure that we are managing that cost base effectively, but still delivering a great product for the fan and creating a great environment for our employees to thrive.
OK. Steve Sayer there from the O2. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Sky this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
OK, you're watching Business Live. We're going to take a quick break. Coming up next, looking at the markets this afternoon. The FTSE is up a little, just over 0.25%. All the details after this quick commercial break.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a fifth Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
This is the game changer seat. Look, it even comes with binoculars. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Very welcome back. Let's have a look at the markets on this Wednesday afternoon. And the S&P 500 has risen above what it had been earlier on today after, of course, November's inflation reports met economists' projections, clearing the way, it does seem, for a Federal Reserve cut in interest rates at its next meeting a little later on this month, in fact, on December 18th. Here in Europe, markets also closed higher as traders digested that inflation data. And in London, things really haven't changed very much. The FTSE up there, as you see, 0.26%. Let's look at the currencies. The pound's down a fraction. Very little, though, change actually against the US dollar at 128. Up again against the euro at 121 today. And let's look at oil. It's made some gains today, actually up at 1.25% at $73 a barrel effectively. But that price has increased a little bit over the last couple of days. Maybe not surprised given the turmoil that we've seen emerge in the Middle East. OK, let's talk about all of this with Tony Gibb, who joins us this afternoon. Tony, good afternoon to you. Can we just start with the currencies? And we've actually seen sterling doing pretty well over the last couple of weeks, particularly against the euro. I think to the point where in the last 24 hours or so, it has reached an 8-year high, essentially a post-Brexit vote high.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, we have seen some real strength in sterling, and, yeah, particularly against the euro. I think, what the market is expecting is the ECB to cut rates when that meeting happens tomorrow, from 3.25 down to 3%, and expecting the Bank of England to keep rates on hold when the Bank of England meets next week. So that positive for sterling versus the euro. I think what we've been seeing in Euroland is a degree of weakness of economic data, but also quite a lot of political uncertainty. We've seen what's been happening in France, also what's been happening in Germany, and that's made it, I think, increasingly likely that the ECB has to step in. Whereas in the UK, economic data somewhat more positive. Also a view that some of the policies post-budget are likely to be inflationary. So the Bank of England unlikely to want to sort of get ahead of that too much.
And it is interesting, we were talking a little bit earlier in the programme about inflation, and it's been largely tamed in the United States and here, but there is concerns on both sides of the Atlantic about next year that it could tick up again.
I think that's right. And I think we've seen today inflation data from the US, which, yes, was the strongest we've seen in 7 months, but effectively in line with economists' expectations. 0.3 month on month, 3.3% core CPI year over year. So in line with expectations. But and given the fact that employment and also rents have been relatively under control, the expectation is that rates come down when the Fed meets next week, as you said. But I think there is a concern that when Trump comes in next year and the policies that he introduces will be inflationary. So I think the expectation of rapid rate cuts continuing from here from the Fed are limited.
And Toby, just briefly, if you can, talk to me about China, because we're seeing what feels like successive stimulus attempts, but is it working?
I think it is working from a sentiment perspective locally. I think it's not necessarily working from a sentiment perspective for international investors. So what we've seen is a series of announcements, a positive reaction immediately, but then a bit of a sort of sell-off immediately after that as markets sort of digested the news or the sort of the lack of real detail. This week we had an announcement that from the Politburo that they would be very proactive with fiscal policy and unconventional monetary policy, something they haven't said since the aftermath of the GFC. So some encouraging signs there. Also some encouraging signs about what they might do from a currency perspective to offset tariffs from Trump.
Okay, Toby, great stuff as always. Thank you very much indeed. Toby Gibb there, joining us from central London. Okay, that is it from me on Business Live for today. Back, of course, at 11:30 tomorrow morning. Do join me then if you can. Up next, it's the News Hour with Mark Austin. Have a very good evening. Goodbye.